Sorry for the delay in shiurim, the big gap. I was under the weather and I wasn't able to, but we'll try to cover quite some ground today. Hopefully we'll have enough time, so I'm starting a little bit earlier before the end of Seder. And he goes through some topics connected to Kərməlית, which are connected to Siman Shin Mem Hey, Shin Mem Vav, and connected also to what we're learning in Hilchos Sukkah, which we learned already in Hilchos Sukkah. In Siman Shin Mem Hey, Seif Yutes in the Alter Rebbe, he gives you a couple categories of what a Kərməlית is. For example, seas, rivers, which are deep 10, and even though the water is not mevatel the mechitzis, but usually the depth is not mislaket from Hiluch Daled Amis. It's considered a Kərməlית. Why? For two reasons. First of all, ein noyach tashmishtoi. Two reasons for Kərməlית. Why is this not a Rishus Harabim? Is first of all, it's not noyach tashmishtoi. Reason number one. Reason number two, it's not doimet et gali midbar. Right, that's one type of Kərməlית. Every Kərməlית is going to fit into, there's a reason why it's a Kərməlית. Sif Chafid, Alter Rebbe mentions Bika, which is the fields which are planted with grain or something like that, whether they're growing or they're already cut, and they are not surrounded by a wall which is 10 tfachim high. Another example is when you have what's called a keren zavis, which is a mavoi, which is closed from three sides, but it's open on the fourth end to a direct Rishus Harabim. And even though people push into there when there's a lot of traffic in Rishus Harabim, it's still it's not loinichot ashmishtei, it doesn't have, it's not noyach, it's not comfortable to use it. A Rishus Harabim, which has a roof, is a Kərməlית because it's not doimet et gali midbar. Then in Sif Chafal, Alter Rebbe mentions the istavanis, which is the platform, empty space in front of stores, where the sellers sit on top of platforms. And why is that? It's in Rishus Harabim, but those platforms, those areas are not considered in Rishus Harabim, they're considered a Kərməlית. Why is that? Because it's not made for Hiluch Harabim, third category of something which would be considered a Kərməlית. And the last example of Rishus Harabim in Sif Chafalef is when you have beams in Rishus Harabim where the people who sell stuff hang stuff to sell, and or the platforms where the schayr is on it. That's in Siman Shin Mem Hey. Siman Shin Mem Vav, which I hope you learned, it was on the schedule, it's one of the things you're supposed to learn before, the vacation, discusses the issur of transferring something from one rishus to another rishus. Whether it's a rishus, what's the din mid'oraisa, what's the din mid'rabanan. For example, rishus examples that are there is rishus hayachid to rishus harabim through a mokim ptur, rishus harabim to rishus hayachid through a mokim ptur, carrying within a Kərməlית, carrying from a Kərməlית to another Kərməlית, a skupa, which is a form of platform in front of the house, under a roof, the gag, and then that's the general topic of Siman Shin Mem Vav. We'll go through some of what today we're going to talk about is some of the specifics in Siman Shin Mem Vav. In Seif Vav, we get introduced to a new type of Kərməlית. It means we know that the Kərmelites that we discussed until now are all within Rishus Harabim. Yes, the Alter Rebbe did mention the concept of something which is a Rishus Hayachid, which could become a Rishus Harabim. It could become a Kərmelyt. Here we see another example, the new concept of a Rishus Hayachid, something which is a Rishus Hayachid mid'oraisa, but it is essentially a Kərmelyt. What's the example? A karfef. A karfef, yoiser mi beis osayim shelo yehukaf ledira. That's the concept. What's a karfef? We're going to soon see. Yoiser mi beis osayim, which was not surrounded, the gate was not put around it for the purpose of living inside of it, but it has a goded, it has a gate, it has some form of fence around it of 10 tvachim, a kosher fence, which midiraisa is rishus hayachid, it's completely surrounded. Midrabanon, being that's loy hukaf ledira, and mechusar dir, no, it was not surrounded, it was not closed off for the purpose of living there, and it doesn't, nobody lives in there. It's considered a Carmelis midrabanon. Midiraisa is rishus hayachid, which means that even though you would think, since it became a Carmelis, there has a chumrah now, because somebody who throws from here, from this karfef into the Rishus Harabim, even though he thinks he's in the Carmelis, he's actually over the Issa Deraisa of Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Harabim. And same thing the other way around, throwing from Rishus Harabim into this karfef. However, even though usually you're allowed to carry, you're not allowed to carry from a Rishus Hayachid to a Carmelis, but transferring from one Carmelis to another Carmelis in certain scenarios is permitted. And even though this will be derived as a Rishus Hayachid, because Chacham made it into a Carmelis, you're allowed to transfer from this type of Carmelis, which is a Karfef, to another Carmelis. What is this Karfef? You're not going to see it in Shin Mem Vav. It's actually mentioned in Shin Nun Ches. The beginning of Shin Nun Ches, the Alter Rebbe writes, Hekef Godel lehachnis boy eitzim loitzar. It's a big enclosed space where you have wood from which you carry it for storage. Hekef Godel lehachnis boy eitzim loitzar. All you use it for, you don't live there, all you use it for is to transfer from one place to another place. Over there also mentions ginois, which is gardens, pardesim, orchards which have trees, and all those are not mukaf l'dira. Now, how do you calculate this? What's his base asayim? So the Alter Rebbe over there explains, and it means it has to have 5,000 square amas. How do you calculate? There has to be 70 amas and 2/3 of an amma. 2/3 of an amma is another 4 tfachim, because amma is 6 tfachim, and a little bit more than that. If it's exactly Beis Hasayim, it's not a problem. If it's Yosim and Beis Hasayim, then it becomes awesome. Yeah, and that's what's that calculation? It's about 33, almost 34 meters by 34 meters, 33.90 meters each direction. Again, the reason I'm using meters, I told you in the beginning of this series, because meters is easy for multiplying. You could convert it to any form of measurement that you want, and the millimeters, centimeters, meters, kilometers are all multiplies of themselves. It's not that like you have to calculate inches to feet to yards to miles, whatever you want to do, and then you have to difference between the American system and the British system, and you don't know which one you're following. Meters is easy, and it makes a lot of sense. You calculate it by meters, and you can convert it into feet if you need to. So you can multiply it on Google or in a calculator. It's not so complicated. Now, if it's less than that, it's not considered a karfef. Now, if it was mukaf l'dira, it explains in Shinun Ches. Afterwards, you plant in there trees. If it was already mukaf l'dira, those trees are not mevatel the mechitzis. If the majority of it was planted with zroim, means with something which grows, not with trees, it is mevatel. Why? Because usually people do hang out around trees, but don't hang out around stalks of wheat. When you want to go for a nice walk in the park, you're going to go to a place which has trees, you're not going to go to a wheat field. Yes, some people do go to cornfields, but it's usually for the maize, not because you want to go spend the day enjoying niflai sabayda. So when you have something which is trees, it's a different category than zroim. And we're going to discuss how mechitzas are made over there. Now, one of the interesting things, one of the questions that come up when you discuss karfef. Why am I discussing karfef now? Because it's a topic which comes up over here. Really, it belongs further in Shinun Ches, but because this whole topic of karfef and how to divide it connects to something which is in Hilchos Sukkah, I decided to discuss it now, even though it would make sense to discuss it in Shinun Ches. And for now we're going to move to other things in this seif, which are taka relevant to this one. First thing is, you have this karfaf, shaloi hukaf ladira. It's completely surrounded, but it was not mukaf ladira. Is there any difference if this karfaf was hukaf b'dei shemayim or b'dei adam? The Bir Halacha and the Mishnah Brura, that goes into a whole discussion. He brings it's a machlekes Taisvus and the Ritva. The Taisvus you already know because Alter Rebbe discussed it in the Kuntres Achan and Shemem Hey. That according to the Taisvus says that if it's b'dei shemayim, it's not a mechitza kulei hai. It's not really a mechitza. And the way the Bir Halacha explains it, the Mishnah Brura, if it's b'dei shemayim and it's a big hekef, then it's not considered a mechitza. But b'dei adam, even a big hekef is yes considered, according to Taisvus. According to the Ritva, if it's such a big hekef that usually people don't do it for residential, even b'dei adam is not considered a reshus hayochid. The Alter Rebbe in the Kuntres Achan, which we mentioned in the previous, in the Alter Rebbe Kuntres Achan Sif Beis and סימן Shemem Hey, which we discussed in previous shiurim, explains that what the discussion of the Taisvus, when it's lo nechshav mechitza kulei hai, it doesn't mean how other people understand it, that it's ois mechitza. Rather, it's not mechitza kulei hai means that it's not such a strong mechitza to be able to separate the outside from the inside. But it is enough of a mechitza to be able to separate what's inside. That means if it would have been a reshus harabim without this mechitza, tak, it's a problem. If without this mechitza, it would have not been a reshus harabim, it doesn't have all the tnoim of reshus harabim, because one of the tnoim is missing, whether it's because it's not similar to the golei midbar, or because it's not neyach tashmishte, whatever it is, then this hekef, even though it's b'dei shemayim, does make it into a reshus hayochid, even according to Taisvus. The only time it gets cancelled is for Rabban Boikim Boy. Then the chachamim who are mevatel these mechitzas, even though midei it's still considered a reshus hayochid, even when it's made b'dei shemayim. Which comes out from the mashma from the Alter Rebbe and Kuntres Achan, that even when it's done b'dei shemayim, and even if it's a big hekef, it's still considered a reshus hayochid min haTorah as long as rabbim are not mevatel this mechitza. And it happens to be that if you look also in the way the Chazon Ish explains the difference between the Taisvus and the Ritva, even though the Chazon Ish says in Tzarechiyun, it seems that he says if not many people walk through it, he seems to imply maybe it's fine. He leaves in Tzarechiyun. According to Alter Rebbe, there's no Tzarechiyun. It's clearly that it's considered a reshus hayochid. Another big important point to know is when you look in all the people that discuss a karfaf, you look simply thinking about karfaf. What's the importance of knowing what a karfaf is? Because if you have a hekef around the area for Eruv, and inside of it you have a karfaf, it might be mevatel, according to certain calculations, depends how you do it, it might be mevatel the whole thing, all the mechitzas that are outside of it. You have a problem. I have to make an enclosure to the karfaf. Right? When you look in Rashi, where the Alter Rebbe copies his lashon from, it says hekef godel lahachnis sham eitzim. Now that's the lashon Alter Rebbe, but the Rashi says hekef godel michutz la'ir, outside the city, lahachnis sham eitzim. The Alter Rebbe takes out the words chutz la'ir. Only writes hekef godel. It seems like the Alter Rebbe seems pretty clearly that the Alter Rebbe holds that a karfaf even inside a city is a problem and you'd have to separate it. What's the nafkamin? Like I mentioned, if you're making Eruv within a city and you have a karfaf inside, you have such a problem. You have this problem and you have to deal with the problem. You can't just... If
you're hukaf l'dira.
It's what?
You're doing a l'dira, what's the problem?
What if you're doing a l'dira? It's not, you're not doing a l'dira, it's already hukaf. It's not l'dira. Could be mevatel.
No,
the rest.
If you're making Eruv, you can't have in mind to do a l'dira?
It's mevatel the mechitzas. If it's nizra, it's mevatel the mechitzas. And if you look in, and yes, so this, I think that I think that it's mashma from the Mishnah Berurah that it's only chutz la'ir. It's mashma also from the Chazon Ish, it's only chutz la'ir, but if you read the Alter Rebbe simply, it's mashma that it is even inside the city. Now, if this idea that the karfif even inside the city could be mevatelit, if you look in the letter that the Rebbe wrote, it's on page 139 in your white books, the letter to Rav Moshkovich, who he made the Eruv in Manhattan, and he sent to the Rebbe the kuntras that he wrote about it. In page 139, the comments that the Rebbe gave him, the Rebbe reviewed the whole book and it says, I got the kuntras. The Pelish, his second paragraph, page 139 in your book. The Pelish, it's in the Pelish lehiski b'chol hashakra v'taria sheshola b'kuntras shebeshola chelei oides ha'inyon dezroim hanimtzoim be'ir sheladas kamo rishonim v'achronim mevatlam ha'mechitzes. Talking about the Zroim inside the city, not outside the city, and they are mevatel. Could be, has to be ruba, but you still have to close it off. Question is if you're going to, how much of it is. Yeah. Go now to make an Eruv only in the quarter of Manhattan, right? Make an Eruv between 40th Street and 80th Street. The whole middle you have Central Park. So Central Park is not a karfif because Guinness Pardesim, it's full of trees and you can walk around it. But within it you have sections which are karfifs. You have big ponds, you have other things which are karfifis.
No, but only Nizra. Only Nizra.
Nizra's mevatel mechitzes.
Right.
If it was Nizra afterwards, mevatel mechitzes. So let's say you have a big field in the middle. Some places you have big fields in the middle.
Has to be Nizra after you make the Eruv?
To be mevatel the mechitzes?
Yeah.
You have to be nizra. If you make the mechitzes, yes, it has to be nizra. It has to be done afterwards. Yeah.
So that's for sure possible.
I was sure it's possible. You make a hekef in a place, and you didn't close off the fields. It's not a big place. You might have a problem. You have to calculate the zroim.
The other saying it's a problem. Why would it be a problem? If it's not, most of Manhattan is not Nizra. It's not Nizra after you made the Eruv.
It's nizra. If you don't make a specific hekef to separate this karfif from the rest of it, then how do you calculate the distance of it? I don't know which specific place the Rebbe was referring to, but the Rebbe was saying that it's there.
You have to make an Eruv and plus you have to separate.
Yeah, and on the next page, the next letter, the same person, which was sent 2 months later. Masha Kosav b'inyan hazroim shelo yiro hazroim b'Manhattan hin l'pele hadover ki merubim him bekama mekayim sham. You go look, you'll find them. That's what the Rebbe tells them. I don't know if today they still have it because today there's a lot more buildings, but it's still a concept that you have to discuss. So back to what I was saying before, karfifos, even in a city, you have to be worried about them. Now the Alter Rebbe continues in Shin Mem Vav, Sif Ches. If you have a Kərmelyt which opens up into a garden, into a gina. The gina is more than Beis Hasayim. And it's completely mukaf, but it was not hukaf l'dir. So midrash it's a Rishus Yachid, midrabanan it is a Kərmelyt. And in front of this gina there is a regular Kərmelyt. You're allowed to take a key from the Kərmelyt. This is a quote from the Ramah. I take a key from the Kərmelyt to open the gina. But if there is a platform between the Kərmelyt and this gina, which is a Rishus Yachid, and that platform is a Rishus Yachid, why? Because it's 10 tvachim high and 4 by 4 wide. Yeah, if you have the steps going up to it, or it's less than 10, but it has a mechitzah from the right, a mechitzah from the left, and something on top of it. Then over there we say pitikra, and then over there, then we say pitikra yored v'saisem. We're soon going to see what specifically pitikra means. It's considered that there is a mechitzah by the askupa, by this platform, and this platform becomes a Reshus HaYachid Gemura, and therefore you cannot carry from a Kərməlית into the Reshus HaYachid Gemura, and from the Reshus HaYachid Gemura into the next Reshus HaYachid, which is a Kərməlית. And in Siftes, the Alter Rebbe explains, and the reason even though the Kuntas Achron is on Sifches, I'm explaining Siftes because it's relevant to the Kuntas Achron. In Siftes, the Alter Rebbe explains that if this askupo that we say, this platform, that we say the concept of pitikra, how do we say pitikra, so I'm going to explain, but the concept we say pitikra, which makes this into Reshus HaYachid, is in front of a Reshus HaYachid Gomor, not in front of a Kərməlית. So you have a Reshus HaYachid, and a askupa, and then a gineh. So, min hadin, you would be able to carry from the askupa into the house, or the other way. However, being that not everybody's baki to calculate whether the beam on top, because we have one on the side, and then the beam on top, which we use for pitikra, you get it to say some, and you have the beam on top, not everybody's able to calculate exactly if it's 4 tefachim wide or not, then we should be machmer. Then comes the Kuntas Achron. The Kuntas Achron comes and discusses what the Magen Avraham asks, because what the Alter Rebbe says in Sif Ches, that when you have a wall on the right, a wall on the left, on this askupa, you have a wall, it's less than 10 height, so it's not really Reshus HaYachid independently, but it has a wall on the right, a wall on the left, and a beam on top, and that beam, as we say, pitikra, and therefore this askupa becomes a Reshus HaYachid, which is what the Rama says. The Magen Avraham has a question on it. Magen Avraham's question is, how can you say pitikra? Pitikra only applies when the two walls are as a corner, one next to another, not when they are one opposite the other. Why? Because then you have mefulish. You can walk right through it. So how do you say pitikra? Pitikra, you're going to say when it's one next to another, and then you have a third wall, and you make that into pitikra. But when you have two across from each other and a beam on top of it, it's not a pitikra. How can you say pitikra over here? It's mefulish. So he said, Alter Rebbe explains, no, from Taisus it's mashma that let's say you have a mavoi, which one side of it, it's one of the sides broke. And then we're going to use the further wall, the wall out. That means this wall over here broke. You're going to use the wall all the way in the back. And that wall will be considered the third wall. And then we're going to say pitikra. So the same thing would apply here regarding this askupa in front of this garden. We're going to say that the further wall becomes like the wall which is closing it off, and that way we could say pitikra. That's point number one. Point number two, even when you have one against the other, across from each other, you can still say pitikra according to certain scenarios. It doesn't work for the Shita of Rav that says that you need the two mechitzas touching each other like a V, but it does work for this pitikra, does work to prevent the idea of mefulish. Now the Rebbe explains that the same thing could explain, the same idea also applies to a door. If you have a skupa in front of a door, and you have a wall on the right and a wall on the left, and you have a door behind it, and this door, when it swings open, opens and closes, so it's not really a full-fledged mechitza because it opens and closes. We can't use it as a full mechitza to be matir this askupa to carry in it because ultimately the door opens and closes. We can't use it as a pirza gemura because it ultimately gets locked. Because if it would be a pirza gemura, you would be able to carry on that askupa. Because if it would be completely open. So therefore, we don't have, in front of the door, we don't have the four mechitzas to be matir the askupa. And therefore, when you have the door is considered part of the house and not part of the askupa, and it does not help you to be can be considered a mechitza to be able to carry in the askupa. What's this relevant to? The hemshech of siftes. What Alter Rebbe says, you have to be careful when you have a house which is open to a Kרמלית, and in front of the house you have a platform, and you can only carry up until where the door frame ends. You can't go past it. Now, from the outside, you can't go onto the askupa. From the inside, you can't go past the door frame. Why? Because the askupa, we're not exactly sure what the gedder is. If you're standing from outside and you're coming onto this askupa, you're going to say maybe it's a full-fledged reshus. Why? Because it has a door behind it and it has the two walls on the side. But the door is not really a full mechitza. So it's not enough to consider it its own enclosed, its own reshus from three sides. At the same time, to carry from inside the house into that askupa, you also can't. Why? Because the door is not really a full mechitza, the same way. Therefore, practically speaking, when you have a key and you're going from a Kרמלית onto such a place and it's not closed off, in such a askupa, you have to have the key under the mashkef. That's all a discussion of reshus hayachid. Once the Alter Rebbe is discussing the askupa, the Alter Rebbe moves on to a topic of a rooftop. When you have because we discussed the top of the roof in Siman Shimon Hey. Now we're going to discuss under the roof in this Siman Shimon Vav. Even though it's not really a discussion of Kרמלית, it's a discussion of if you have a rooftop, if you have a roof sticking out in front of your house, what is the din of this roof? Right, because everything we discussed until now about the askupa was when you walk out of your house, you have a platform and you have two walls on the two sides. Now, if you have a roof that's sticking out over the house, and this roof doesn't have two walls on the two sides, it's a roof that sticks out all around the house and under the roof, you would come and you would think, hey, we could say pitikra. The answer is no, you can't say pitikra. Whatever is under the roof is bottled to whichever reshus it is open to. So if it's open to a reshus harabim, it's bottled to a reshus harabim. If it's open to a Kרמלית, it's bottled to a Kרמלית. It's bichlal not a reshus hayachid. It's completely bottled to whatever is in front of it. And therefore, if you would be standing, if that place would be a reshus harabim, outside, right outside, under the roof, and you would be walking 2 amas, and you would make your third amma of walking would go under the roof, you would not be over any isser, because you do not enter reshus yachid. It's definitely like the other reshus that it's in. Now, what happens if this roof has beams that hold up the roof? So you have the roof sticking out, an awning sticking out, and in front of the awning you have 2 beams which hold up the awning, only 2 beams. You would think it's a tzuras HaPesach. Why? Because you have a beam at the corner of the awning, and you have the wall of the house, and you have a roof on top of it. It looks like an opening. The answer is it's not. Why? Because you don't have a mechitza from both sides. You only have a mechitza in the back, the wall of the house. And in the front, you have 2 beams, and if you're going to say, maybe pitikra. But you don't have, in the sides, you don't have any mechitzas. There's no tzuras HaPesach on the sides, there's only 1 beam. Only 1 beam at the corner.
Not 2?
There's 2 beams, but in the front. To be able to hold something up, if it wouldn't be connected to the house, you would need 4 beams. But now you don't have it. Usually you're going to see an awning, they screw it into the wall of the house, and then towards the end, they have the 2 beams to hold up the other end of the awning. They don't have 2 beams touching the wall of the house. What do you need it for? But for Shabbos you do. Because without those 2 beams, you don't have a mechitza.
It's not like if it's an amma thick.
What?
It's considered like another, considered like 4 walls, no?
Yeah, but it's not the amma thick.
That's right.
It's not an amma thick. Where are you going to put it? You only have, only have in 2 corners. Only have in the front, not in the back.
In the back of the wall.
You have 1 wall, but the wall is not sticking out anything. The wall is not sticking out.
It's not amma thick.
It's not amma thick. You'll never see a beam that's amma thick. It's usually a thin piece that holds it up. Huh?
You have these
Ken sein. So therefore, Alter Rebbe says what you have to do, you have to put 2 sticks touching the walls of the house. When you have 2 sticks touching the wall of the house, each one of the sticks that's touching the wall of the house has to be parallel directly to the stick which is at the extreme end that's facing the Rishus Harabim. And now you have 4 posts holding up this roof. When you have 4 posts holding up this roof, then each side, the side on the right has a Tzuras HaPesach because you have a post by the house, and a pole by the house, and a pole by the end, and on top of it is a roof. On the left side, you also have, when you're looking at from the house, you have also a pole on the end by the house, and a pole by the end of the roof, and on top of the roof, it's again another Tzuras HaPesach. And in the front, you also have a Tzuras HaPesach because you have the 2 beams and the roof on top. So you have 3 Tzuras HaPesachs. And in the back, you have the wall of the house. The whole thing becomes a Rishus HaYochid, and you could carry under it. I was the fragen that we all know that we have the Shitta of the Rambam, that Tzuras HaPesach does not help in Merube Parutz Aloimed, when the majority of the wall of the surrounding is Parutz. You can't have such wide Tzuras HaPesachs if it's wide enough. You can't have it all surrounded by Tzuras HaPesachs. And that's a shitta that the Alter Rebbe paskins like it. Here, Tzuras HaPesach doesn't help for the Rishus Harabim. Tzuras HaPesach doesn't help for Rishus Harabim. And over here, if it's open to Rishus Harabim, why is it considered? Why is it ois Rishus Harabim? Only, for Karamelis it does, yeah. The answer is it has a roof. The roof makes it ois Rishus Harabim. If you have a lot of houses connected to each other, and you want to make in the front, and all of them have an awning in front of it, you don't have to make a pole by every house. You just make a pole by the first house, and the pole by the last house, and then that Tzuras HaPesach on the right, Tzuras HaPesach all the way on the left, and it's all good. Just important to remember this, that we are counting the wall of the house as a wall. So it's important to remember this because some people do hold that you can't count fully the walls of the house. Certain scenarios, can't count them. It doesn't seem like there's any problem at all. Even though Siman Shin Samach Beis Alter Rebbe is machmer regarding Merube Oimed al Parutz, and that without Merube Oimed al Parutz you cannot make such a wide Tzuras HaPesach. When you're going to look, you have 10 houses together or 5 houses together. The front Tzuras HaPesach is going to have 1 pole on the right, 1 pole all the way on the left. The front Tzuras HaPesach is going to be much wider than the opening, and it's not Merube Oimed al Parutz, and therefore it should be a problem. The answer is over here, the Alter Rebbe paskin like a Svara Rishena, says a Svara Rishena Iker, and he is Mekel. Now obviously, once you do this, you put these posts up, what's under the roof becomes fully Rishus HaYochid. If it becomes fully Rishus HaYochid, you could carry from the house into there, and from there into the house. If it's only your house, if it's a few houses together, you have to make Erev Chatzir. It's like any time you connect a few properties together. But in front of your house, you're allowed to carry because Rishus HaYochid. And if you take out from there to the Rishus Harabim, you're able to do the Raisa, and the same thing for Kert. Now, when it comes to making it Tzuras HaPesach, it's just important to remember, it's also, you didn't learn it, but you will learn it, the posts don't have to reach all the way to the top. They just have to be mechuven under the top part. When you make it Tzuras HaPesach, if you have a string which is 20 feet high, you don't have to put the post to reach all the way up to the string. As long as the post is mechuven under the string, you're good to go. 10 tvachim high. This is the first of all. So here also that should be the same. Just to be mechuvanim, doesn't have to be touching all the way over there. Now, the question comes up, one of the things that we discuss over here is that to be able to make it, that we make each of the 3 sides of Tzuras HaPesach. All right? We say you have a roof on top, and you have a pole by the house, and a pole by the extreme end, another pole by the house, and a pole by the extreme end, and now we have 3 Tzuras HaPesachs. If the roof is flat, or it's going on a slant, what's the din? do you need the roof to go down a little bit? Because the roof is completely flat. What defines the Tzuras HaPesach? If you have a completely flat roof and you have like this, and you have a stick over here, and this roof is not going down a bit, then what's the beam, the cross beam on top of the stick? You have a stick and you have a stick, and you don't have this sticking out. You don't have a beam. You don't have the mashkef on top. You just have a roof. So Taka the Chazon Ish says that you have to have over there. The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention it b'chlal. Tzemach Tzedek, in one place it's mashma that it's needed, in one place it's mashma that it's not needed, and that's what we're going to discuss now.
I didn't know if you have a thing coming out of the house, you have a scoop, mashke coming out of the house?
No, there's no mashke. If you have a roof coming out of the house.
So you say on top of the house?
Not on top. So the house is there, and in front of the house you have an awning, a straight piece of metal, yeah?
Out of the whole house? Right.
Yeah.
And then you have two beams that you put
By the house, yeah.
on the corners? Or
On the corners,
the corners.
yeah.
Well, it also has to be coming out?
But the Chazon Ish has to be also folded downwards.
Well, if it's by the edge,
Yeah.
you still have to have it folded.
You have to have something to close off the top. At Tzuras HaPesach is a pole, like a mezuzah. Mezuzah, and a mashkef on top.
But here you have a mashke.
No, you don't. You have a flat piece of metal. It's not a mashkef. It's a flat piece of metal for everything together. What makes it Tzuras HaPesach? What dafka Tzuras HaPesach? The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this requirement. And Tzemach Tzedek, maybe yes, maybe not. That's what we're going to discuss now. And from there we're going to move to the Chesukah. The Tzemach Tzedek has a tshuva which is in your book. It's a short tshuva, just a bunch of pages because they put a lot of footnotes in it. It's on page 70 in your white book. It's in the newest edition. When they redid the Tzemach Tzedek like 3 years ago, or L'chaim, it became Siman Pei Daled. Before that, it was in Shara Miluim Chelik Hey, Siman Vav. And that discusses these something similar to this. What's the question? It's discussing something called the gankes. What is this gankes? It's like a platform in front of the house, a kind of porch in front of the house, where in the winter it's where it's meant to that the snow shouldn't hit over there, and in the summer you sit and chill over there. What's that? You have beams, and you have a roof on top of it, and it's a platform in front of the house. But the way the question is described is, there's beams, and there is a cross beam on top of it, on all three sides. That means the beam, 4 beams, and then also beams on top of them. And on top of those beams, you have a roof. That's how the story is described over here. Yeah, the question is described. Tzuras HaChsadrois, tzad echad yesh la mechitza shlema, which is the house, mechitza habayis. Shloisha tzadim ein la mechitza, v'shekol tzad k'moi Tzuras HaPesach. Ki amud echad notes etzem mechitza habayis miyamin, l'mosi amud echad etzem mechitza habayis mismoil, hamerchak b'neim kirecha v'achsadre, the width of this porch, l'negdam ish oit shnei amudim, דהיינו עמוד אחד מכוון נגד העמוד שעצם מחיצה בייס מימין, ואחד מכוון נגד העמוד שעצם מחיצה בייס משמאל. Each one is parallel to the one that's next to the house. ועל גביהן מלמעלה יש קרע על כל שני עמודים. היינו קרע אחד על אחס על העמוד הימני של הבייס ועמוד אחד שכנגדוי, וקרע אחס על העמוד השמאלי של הבייס ועמוד שכנגדוי, ועוד קרע אחס על שני עמודים שכנגד שתי העמודים שאצל הבייס. נמצא מגימל צדדים יש לנו צורס הפסח. Before we even discuss the roof, ומצד אחד מחיצה גמורה מחיצה הבייס. והנה, על הקרס הנ"ל, עושים גם כן גג מלמעלה, והוא גג האכסדרה. And what roof is it? It's a slanted roof, it's not a flat roof. Flat roof is different than slanted roof. ותידעו התמונת הגגים שלנו שהם הולכים בשיפוע, ונמשכים קצת להולאו מקרס של גבי עמודים הנ"ל, and it sticks out a little bit over these tzuras HaPesachs that are used to enclose this porch / front of the house, place to sit in the summer and place to absorb the snow in the winter. And Tzemach Tzedek discusses how it's mutter to carry over there. Because there's two svaras that the Tzemach Tzedek says, either because of pitikra yed v'seisim, or because of tzuras HaPesach. And first the Tzemach Tzedek discusses the din of pitikra, and gives the yesodis of pitikra if it applies over here or not. And then he goes into tzuras HaPesach to see if it applies here, or not. So he says the first thing is to say pitikra yed v'seisim, you can't say. Why not? Because since the roof goes over the tzuras HaPesach, continues past it, it's not going to drop down suddenly now. And only if it will be completely flat, and it wouldn't go over the tzuras HaPesach in the front, then we could say so. Yeah, but that only applies when the roof does not have a tzuras HaPesach under. Over here you have a tzuras HaPesach under. So maybe together with the tzuras HaPesach you could say pitikra. And then maybe you could say pitikra. Then he moves on to the next nekuda that Tzemach Tzedek says. We discussed the idea previously when discussing roofs. Let's take a break from this topic for a second. When we discussed roofs, when you're on top of the roof, we say that you can't say gudasik. What's the reason why we said you can't say gudasik when the roof sticks out over the walls of the house? Because when you're standing on the roof, you don't see the walls of the house. So you can't say gudasik going upwards. So he says that's completely irrelevant over here, the fact that the roof sticks out over the tzuras HaPesach. Why? Because you're not standing on top of the roof, you're standing under the roof. When you're standing under the roof, you pick up your head, you'll see the tzuras HaPesach. You'll see the what's going to be the gudachis, the pitikra. So you can't say it's compared to that. Rather, he says, so that's why maybe you could say pitikra over here. You're going to combine the tzuras HaPesach, and you're going to say inside, because you have a tzuras HaPesach with a roof on top of it, even though the roof goes a little bit over the tzuras HaPesach, still we're going to say pitikra goes down because it has a tzuras HaPesach under it. So it's as if it turns down. It's the turning down of the roof is if it's in a slant. It's in a slant. By the end of the slant, when they have the tzuras HaPesach, that's where it drops down as pitikra. Maybe this pitikra that closes off the front. And then you have pitikra yed v'seisim. So Tzemach Tzedek says it doesn't work. Why? Because according to Taisus and the Rosh, they're medayek pitikra yed v'seisim, not pikoira yed v'seisim. Only when the tikra ends and then it has a turn going down, that's when we say pitikra goes down. But a koira is not enough, unless the koira is 4 tfachim, like we discussed earlier. To make it go over, you need to have 4 tfachim, and then you could say pitikra. And we already know that since not everybody's bucky, and the width of koira to be able to measure when you're standing over here how big the koira is on top, you can't rely on it for pitikra. So you can't say that tzuras HaPesach is matiret midin pitikra yed v'seisim. More so, because the Beis Yosef paskins that pitikra only works in one. And over here you have to be able to solve 3 walls, not 1 wall. So how are you going to be able to carry inside this platform that's in front of the house? So mitzat pitikra, you can't. The only thing you have left is the idea of tzuras HaPesach, which is what we saw in the Alter Rebbe. He says, being that there is a tzuras HaPesach on each one of the 3 sides, Yeshleimar, this is what helps. And he says, and even though the Alter Rebbe brings the opinion of the Rambam that these tzuras HaPesachs might not help, still the majority of the poskim disagree with him. Tzemach Tzedek, the Alter Rebbe himself says that the Ikrik is for Rishayna, but Tzemach Tzedek points out to you, the majority of the poskim disagree with the Rambam, so you don't have to follow the Chumradik opinion. That will solve one problem. It's not going to solve if you have the problem if it's much bigger than the of Merubah Midal Parutz. It will solve the Tzuras HaPesach for Shusarabim. It's not going to solve the problem of Merubah Midal Parutz. If you have a problem with Merubah Midal Parutz, you still have that problem. So he says, first of all, the majority of poskim don't hold like that. Second of all, even according to the Rambam, even if he doesn't, according to the Rambam, you could say, okay, so he doesn't hold of the Merubah, but maybe he does hold of Pitikra. We say we don't hold like Pitikra because it takes us in the Rosh, but the Rambam does hold of Pitikra in such a scenario. And on one side, it for sure helps. Over here, you have two sides, two sides, and the front is the one side. So on the one side, for sure is going to help if it goes down. Why do you have to worry about it? The Pitikra will help on one side. And especially if the Achsadra itself is big enough, and you're able to consider that Rosh Hashanah by itself, so you don't have to worry about that. The Tzuras HaPesach is what solves it. Yeah, so now, from here, we'll see two things. First of all, the way that Tzemach Tzedek describes it is the only reason why Pitikra might help, would be because of the Tzuras HaPesach under it. The only way the Tzuras HaPesach helped is because, the only way this helped in this Achsadra is because you had the Tzuras HaPesachs under it, and not that you had the two poles and no pole on top of it. Tzemach Tzedek doesn't mention a scenario where you have, the story of Tzemach Tzedek is that you had two poles, and you had poles, and on top of the poles you had another pole on top. But he doesn't mention that. But that's one place in the Tzemach Tzedek. You look in, a few pages later in your book, in Piskei Dinim of the Tzemach Tzedek, this is page 99 in your book. Piskei Dinim of the Tzemach Tzedek, towards the end, they collected a lot of other writings of Tzemach Tzedek. One of the things that's over there is Chidushim al Harambam. Chidushim al Rabbeinu Yerucham. Chidushim al Harambam. The Tzemach Tzedek wrote a very interesting thing, if you look at it. It's a Shulchan Aruch Mesudar al Pi Halachas Harambam. The Tzemach Tzedek rewrote the halachas of the Shulchan Aruch, plus his own psakim, based on the Seder of the Rambam. So in Perek Tezayin, you have Halacha Vav, Halacha Zayin. This was rewritten by Tzemach Tzedek, and Halacha Zayin, you have this halacha, the way Tzemach Tzedek writes it. Makoim shehukav shaloi ledire. So makoim shehukav, where it was surrounded, an empty space was surrounded, but it was not meant ledire. However, in the had shloisha, had three sein, base gimel sein, not base asayim. And now you want to make it mutter to carry. So you build a roof over one base sa'ah. Now you're left with exactly base asayim. Base asayim is not a problem. Only more than base asayim is a problem. So now you covered one, you're left with two. Mutter l'taltel b'kula, you're allowed to carry in the whole area. Why? This is what it brings from Alter Rebbe. Shanu royim es pi atigru kili mechitzah yeres v'semes mafsekes min ha-beis se'in l'shlishis. Because we see the idea of Pitikra, that since you have a roof going on one base sa'ah, then when it drops down over there, closes it off, separates the one from the two, now you have only two left, those two are fine. V'afilu im hakirui hu meshupa. This applies even if the roof is slanted. And the tshuva, the Tzemach Tzedek says that when the roof is slanted, you can't do Pitikra Yedveseisim. Over here, the Tzemach Tzedek says that you could do even if it's slanted. Why? Mikol makim royim keilu hoysa mechitza gemura b'soif hakirui. We still, even when it's meshupa, when it's slanted, we still see it as if it dropped and it went down over there, even when it's slanted. Not only when it's not like he explains in the tshuva. A similar idea you'll see 2 pages later. In Chidushim al Rabbeinu Yerucham, it's on page 102 in your book. It's Chidushim al Rabbeinu Yerucham, towards the bottom of the first column. It's Daf Nun Ches Seif Amud Gimel. It says achsadra asuya al gabe petzimim. When you have a achsadra which is built on top of these beams, klemer amudim, afa b'shein l'shalosh mechitzas muter l'talta b'kula ki pitikra yered v'seisem. Even though it only has walls on 3 sides because it's built on these petzimim are sticking out, you still say pitikra yered v'seisem, and it's fine. And then in parentheses, the Tzemach Tzedek adds all the things. First of all, according to Pirush Rashi, you could say Pitikra and 4 mechitzas. Tosfos says that this applies only when you're discussing a Karamelis, not discussing Rishus Harabim. Okay, so here we're discussing a Karamelis. According to Rabbeinu Tam, Pitikra could work for two, even more than one, not like the B'si Yosef. When, as long as the two are one next to another, not one across from another. And then he says, that we say that we could say on all four sides, Pitikra Yered V'Seisim, applies Mishum Sheyesh Dalet Petzimin, because it has four beams, one on each corner of this Achsadra. In such a scenario, we could say Pitikra Yered V'Seisim. So if you follow what it says in the Chidushim al Rambam, it seems like the Tzemach Tzedek paskins that first of all a roof, even a slanted roof, we say Pitikra. We're not worried about the fact that it doesn't have a Tzuras HaPesach right by the end. If from the tshuva it's mashma that you do have to be machmer to have a beam on top, otherwise you can't say particularly the Seisim. In the Lashon Al Tereb it's mashma, if it's only two beams, the roof on top becomes the actual Tzuras HaPesach. You don't have to add a beam on top. Only in the tshuva. In the tshuva you could say that you could be medayik both ways when it comes to whether you have to have the beam on top or not, but it's clear from the tshuva that the slanted roof does not become pitikra. It's clear from the Chidushim al Rambam the slanted roof does become pitikra, and the way that Tzemach Tzedek wrote it in the Chidushim al Rambam, not as a form of Chidushim, but rather as a form of Psak Din, because it was written as Shulchan Aruch Mesuri Lefi Halachas Rambam. It was halachas arranged in the order of the Rambam. The question that one's a tshuva and one's a piskedidim, and one place it's one way, one place it's the other way. Not everything you're able to for. Sometimes I don't know which one was written first. That is regarding Eirovin. Now we're going to move on to Hilchos Sukkah. Two things in Hilchos Sukkah, short. In this booklet that I gave you in Hilchos Sukkah, there is Hashlama l'Siman Taf Reish Lamed. If you turn the pages after Taf Reish Chavtes, different design, something called Hashlama l'Siman Taf Reish Lamed. דיני Tfonis HaSukkah. There is no Siman Taf Reish Lamed in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. There is a Hashlama to the Alter Rebbe Siman Taf Reish Lamed. This was printed in Piskedinim of the Tzemach Tzedek. It's not from the Tzemach Tzedek. When Yeshua Munshine prepared the book Teres Chabad Bibliografia and the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe wrote him a meine that Einoi muskar behamovei al dvar kama vekama olim lehilchos sukkah pnimu misaviv shafilu einoi vadei vechulu kedai la'askirei. Still it should be mentioned. So it is something which we don't know who wrote it, but it was definitely written in the form which should be considered as valid. And it was printed in the back of the Tzemach Tzedek, Piskedinim of Tzemach Tzedek. So over there it has, it's prepared along the Seder of the Shulchan Aruch. So in Sif Ches, over here, of this Hashlama, he says that when we're discussing Pitikra Yered V'Seisim, there's no difference between Sukkah and Hilchos Shabbos. Just like in Hilchos Shabbos we say that, just like if one wall completely collapses and on top of it you have 4 tefachim, a beam going 4 tefachim, or even 1 tefach according to certain opinions, we say Pitikra Yered V'Seisim. Same thing if you have 2 walls, and you don't have 3 walls, you have 2 walls, but they're one next to each other, not like a corner, and then a 3rd wall collapses, we still say Pitikra, as long as they are like that. As long as there's no mefulish, you have no problem, you still say Pitikra. But when it's mefulish, you cannot say Pitikra. However, if it has petzimim, if it has these, if it's sitting on top of these beams, and the beams are sticking out, and that is on the 3rd wall, that means you have a roof on top. You have a wall on the right, a wall on the north, a wall on the east, and they're touching. It's a corner. The third wall, you have two beams that are sticking out. Those two beams, yeshayim, that helps for pitikra, even if it's mefulish. And you could rely on them b'diavad. That's how he writes. Happens to the third side. The fourth side is automatically because it has a two. Talking about the third side, huh?
Coming out from both sides.
No. Yeah, third side, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, the way we learned in the Tzemach Tzedek, it seems that in the Chidushim Rabbeinu Yerucham, it seems that the Petzimim makes it even l'chatchila for all four walls. Not only b'diavad. Over here, when he discusses the Chasuki, he mentions it only in din of b'diavad. And Sif Tes that he discusses over here in this Hashlama, he says over here, what's the yesod? How are we making these walls? These walls are not being made based on the concept of mechitzas. Mechitza, din of mechitza, you have to have mechitza, the gdoyim are not boikim through. That's why you have to have 10 tvachim. And you can't have 3 tvachim on the bottom. They're open. Over here, we're not looking at the mechitzas from the bottom up. Because you have this petzimim, and you have the roof on top, we consider the roof going downwards as a pitikra yered v'seisim. And being of pitikra yered v'seisim, the roof starts from the top going down, so we don't care if there is bekias gdoim. V'yesh mi shenira midvarov, there is certain opinions that pitikra does not help unless you have petzimim, because then you have a tzuras pesach, or there's no bekias gdoim. So a new din, a new gather when it comes to pitikras, even if you want to say pitikra, you have to have the two beams under it. You can't just rely on even on a third wall for pitikra. However, he says that ikras kisvara rishayna, that even if there is bekias gdoim, we still could say pitikra yered. Even if there is bekias gdoim, we still could say pitikra yered v'seisim, even if you do not have the petzimim on that specific side that you want to do pitikra.
I don't get it. How can you have pitikra without the whole thing of pitikra is they don't have a wall there, so it's always going to be there.
Right, so that's what he says. He says that some people say that you need to have the petzimim also. To be able to make pitikra, you have to have the petzimim in front. Yeah, but then you don't have to worry about bekias gdoim, because then it becomes the midin tzuras pesach. Yeah, but that is what the discussion is regarding pitikra when it comes to sukkah. So, going back to what we were discussing before, when you have in front of your house a platform, a porch, and you have a roof on top of the porch, and you want to be able to carry under the porch, so you have to have, so even if it's slanted, it seems like from the Piskei Din of Tzemach Tzedek, it seems like it's fine, as long as you have the beams under it. From the Alter Rebbe, it's mashma that the beams you have to have, as long as the beams are directly one under, it means you have 4 beams, it's still fine. And you don't have to have a cross beam under the roof. From the Tzemach Tzedek in the Tshuva, it's mashma that's the only reason he was matir is because you have a cross beam under the roof. From the Alter Rebbe, there's no way to be medayik, because you could say, maybe the Alter Rebbe is talking about over here only when the roof is flat, not when the roof is slanted, to be able to say pitikra or not. But the pashtus of the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe is that the beams, you just have to have the beams standing without the cross beams under the roof, and that's already considered a tzuras pesach to be able to allow you to carry under the roof. Carry under the roof. From the Tzemach Tzedek, it's mashmat. You do need to have the cross beams when you're looking at it from the tshuva, and if it's slanted, you cannot say pitikra. Like I said, from the chidushim, it's mashma that you could say in pitikra and slanted, and you don't have to have the beams in front of it. So if you have in front of you a awning, just make sure that you have the beams placed by the house. Usually there isn't beams by the house. It's very easy to fix it by just putting 2 beams in the house. You have to make sure they're directly parallel to the beam that's in the far end of the awning. And then you're able to and then you're able to carry it. Now, if you have pitzimim on top over there, it means they're not going all the way up, but you have these pitzimim that are sitting and you're visible. These pitzimim are visible when you're sitting on top of the porch. Then those pitzimim make it that you still have, the roof is still particularly v'seisem.
So even if it's less than Dal Tvachim, you could carry?
What's less than Tvachim?
If you have pitzimim,
And you have no roof?
You have a roof and a few.
So the roof is more than Dal Tvachim? The roof is less than Dal Tvachim? Then you only carry under the roof.
What?
The roof is less than Dal Tvachim. What are you carrying under? It's just an extension of the awning. Dal Tvachim is not that much. Just an extension of the doorway. We're talking about it's much bigger. We're talking about a big area. And if it's across a bunch of houses, you could do the same thing. You have to make sure whenever you do that, you have to check. It's always important to check that you have the beams. However, if you definitely should put, if you have a slanted roof, you definitely should put a proper tzuras pesach under the roof on each of the two sides, and not just put the beams on top to be able to say particularly according to the tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek. Otherwise, if you don't have the tzuras pesachs, then you might not have particularly v'seisim, and it will become a shaila whether, obviously it's mutter, because in another place you could be medayik, but still should not lachatchila. If you're able, once you do it right. So once you do it tzuras pesach. Now, most of the time when you have awnings in front of the house, if it's a permanent awning, it already has metal or a frame that holds up the awning, so you have a cross beam on top and you have a beam on the front. You just have to put one beam in the other end, and you have a full tzuras pesach under the roof. Where again would this apply? Very common when you have a tent. You have a tent, and the tent outside, and the tent it rolls over on the sides sometimes it doesn't. In the days of Corona, it's very common. People are asking. Tell them you have to look inside and see. I told the people I want to get a video of the inside to see if you have the beams going across, if you have tzuras pesachs inside the tent, and that way you might be able to say pitikra in that area. Obviously, we're not talking about a tent in a Rishus Harabim, we're talking about a tent that's inside a Rishus HaYachid, which is not surrounded. Rishus HaYachid doesn't have a proper eruv around it, so you just have to have a proper mechitzas on the four sides, and then you're able to do it. So not only to have the beams, but to have the two beams with the cross beam on top on each of the four sides. Usually by tents you do have it, but not always. Sometimes I did see tents where the beams were not going, where the cross beams were not going on top of the beams that were standing up. Then you had a problem. I don't just add string on top of those, and make it into tzuras pesach on those sides, and that way you should be able to carry over there. Okay, say that.